At exactly 11:30 p.m. on July 13th, 1966, a shadow fell across one of Chicago's most peaceful neighborhoods that would forever change the landscape of American crime. The two-story townhouse at 2319 East 100th Street stood quietly under the summer night sky, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. Inside, 8 young women were living what they believed would be the best years of their lives. This wasn't just any house. This was a beacon of hope in Chicago's South Side, a residence for student nurses who had traveled from across the country, and even from the Philippines, to pursue their dreams of saving lives. The brick building, with its modest front porch and white-trimmed windows, represented everything pure about human ambition. Young women dedicating their lives to healing others. Gloria Jean Davy, 22, sat at the small kitchen table, her blonde hair catching the overhead light as she studied anatomy charts. Born in Iowa, she possessed a kind of gentle determination that made patients trust her instantly. Her blue eyes held dreams of working in pediatrics, of comforting frightened children in hospital beds. In the living room, Patricia Matusek, 20, laughed softly with her roommate as they watched television. Pat's dark hair framed a face that radiated warmth. She had grown up in a small Illinois town where everyone knew her as the girl who helped her mother care for sick neighbors. Nursing wasn't just her career choice, it was her calling. Upstairs, Suzanne Bridget Ferris, 21, was writing a letter to her family back home. Her handwriting was careful and precise, just like everything else about her. Suzanne had the kind of quiet strength that made her the one others turned to in crisis. She wrote about her excitement for graduating soon, about the hospital job waiting for her. The Filipino students brought their own dreams to this house. Merlita Gargullo, 23, had traveled over 8,000 miles from the Philippines, carrying not just her personal ambitions, but the hopes of her entire family. Her English was still careful and deliberate, but her medical knowledge was exceptional. She would often stay up late, reviewing procedures by the light of her small desk lamp. Valentina Passion, 23, shared a room with Merlita. Her gentle nature made her beloved by patients during her clinical rotations. She had a soft voice that could calm even the most agitated patient, and hands that seemed to possess a natural healing touch. Like her friend, she carried the dreams of family back home who had sacrificed everything to send her to America. Nina Jo Schmale, 24, was the artist of the group. Born in Arkansas, she had planned to use her nursing degree to work in military hospitals, caring for soldiers. Her sketchbook was filled with drawings of her roommates, capturing quiet moments of study and friendship. She saw beauty in the dedication that surrounded her. Marion Jordan, 20, was studying in her room when she heard voices downstairs. The youngest of the group, she possessed an infectious optimism that made even the most difficult days bearable. Her family in Michigan had worked extra jobs to pay for her education, and she never forgot the sacrifice. Pamela Lee Wilkening, 20, had just finished her shift at South Chicago Community Hospital, still in her white uniform. She moved through the house with the tired but satisfied exhaustion of someone who had spent the day caring for others. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the practical style of a working nurse, and her hands still smelled faintly of antiseptic. The 9th resident, Corazon Amureo, 23, had arrived from the Philippines with the same dreams as her friends. But tonight, something felt different. As she prepared for bed in the room she shared with Merlita and Valentina, an unexplainable unease settled in her chest. She paused at her window, looking out at the quiet street below. The neighborhood was peaceful. Families had settled in for the night. Children's bicycles lay abandoned on front lawns. Streetlights cast gentle pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks. It was the kind of night when nothing terrible should happen. By 11:30 p.m., a tall figure approached the front door of 2319 East 100th Street. He moved with purpose, his footsteps deliberate on the concrete walkway. Richard Franklin Speck, 24, stood 6 feet tall with dark hair and cold eyes that reflected no warmth, no humanity. On his left forearm, a tattoo declared "Born to Raise Hell" in dark blue ink. He had spent the evening drinking in nearby bars, his mind churning with resentment and rage. Recently rejected for a job on a merchant ship, evicted from his apartment, abandoned by his wife, Speck carried a fury that had been building for years. Tonight, that fury would find its target. As he reached the door handle, the warm light from inside the house seemed to mock him. The sound of gentle voices, the sight of young women pursuing their dreams, it all represented everything he would never be, never have, never deserve. Inside, the 8 nurses continued their evening routines, unaware that their peaceful world was about to shatter forever. The front door opened with a gentle creak that barely disturbed the evening quiet. Richard Speck stepped inside, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere of the house, like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. The warmth that filled these rooms just moments before seemed to drain away, replaced by something cold and predatory. "Don't move," his voice cut through the peaceful sound of the house. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need money." Gloria looked up from her textbooks, her blue eyes widening in confusion and fear. The tall stranger in the doorway held something metallic in his right hand, a gun that caught the lamplight with deadly gleam. In his left hand, a knife blade reflected the ceiling light. "Please," Gloria whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't have much money, but you can take whatever we have." Speck's eyes scanned the room with calculating coldness. 3 young women sat frozen in the living area, their evening of study and relaxation transformed into a nightmare. "Where are the others?" he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that made their blood run cold. "Upstairs," Pat answered, her voice trembling. "Some are sleeping, others are studying. Get them down here. Now. And don't try anything stupid." As the women moved slowly toward the staircase, their minds raced with disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not to them. They were nurses, healers, women who dedicated their lives to helping others. Why would anyone want to hurt them? Upstairs, Suzanne was still writing her letter when she heard Pat's voice calling softly from the bottom of the stairs. "Suzanne Marian, could you come down for a minute?" Something in Pat's tone made Suzanne's hand pause over paper. It wasn't right. It was too controlled, too careful. She exchanged a glance with Mary Ann, who was brushing her long brown hair at the mirror. "Nina, Pam," Pat continued calling. "Please come downstairs." In the back bedroom, Corazon was helping Merlita and Valentina organize their study materials when they heard their names called. The 3 Filipino women looked at each other with growing unease. Something was wrong. One by one, they appeared at the top of the stairs. What they saw below froze them in place. A tall stranger stood in their living room, weapons in both hands, their 3 friends huddled together like frightened birds. "Come down slowly," Speck ordered. "Keep your hands where I can see them." As the 8 women gathered in the living room, Speck studied them with eyes that revealed nothing human. These were educated women, respected professionals, individuals who contributed to society. Everything he was not, everything he resented. "Sit down on the couch," he commanded. "All of you." The couch couldn't hold 8 people comfortably, so they pressed together, drawing what comfort they could from physical contact. Gloria found herself next to Suzanne, their shoulders touching. Pat reached for Nina's hand. The Filipino women, Merlita, Valentina, and Corazon, whispered brief prayers in their native language. "I told you, I just want money," Speck repeated, but his eyes told a different story. They held something darker, more dangerous than simple robbery. "We can give you everything we have," Pam offered, still wearing her hospital uniform from her shift. "Our purses are upstairs. We have maybe $40 or $50 between all of us." Speck laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. $40? You think I came here for $40? The women exchanged terrified glances. "If not money, then what?" "I need something to tie you up with," Speck announced, "so you don't try to run or call the police while I search the house." Mary Ann, the youngest, spoke up with desperate hope in her voice. "There are bed sheets upstairs. You could tear them into strips." For a moment, Speck considered this, then shook his head. "Take me to your room. Show me what you've got." As he forced him toward the stairs, Corazon's mind raced with possibilities. Her room was at the back of the house, the farthest from the staircase. If she could somehow slip away. The group moved slowly up the narrow staircase, Speck behind them with his weapons ready. The wooden steps creaked under their combined weight. each sound seeming unnaturally loud in the tense silence. In the upstairs hallway, family photos smiled down from the walls. Pictures of parents, siblings' graduation ceremonies. Normal life, happy moments, futures filled with promise. None of it seemed real anymore. "This room," Suzanne said, indicating the room she shared with Marianne. "We have extra sheets in the closet." As Speck focused on examining the bedding, Corazon caught Valentina's eye and made an almost imperceptible gesture toward the back bedroom. Valentina's slight nod showed she understood. But as they began to move, Speck's head snapped up. "Where do you think you're going?" "Just to our room," Corazon whispered, "to get our purses for you." "Nobody moves without me," Speck snarled. "You stay together." The moment of hope died. They were trapped, 8 bright futures suddenly hanging in the balance. Outside, Chicago continued its normal evening rhythm, unaware that in one house on East 100th Street, something unspeakably evil was about to unfold. What do you think is really happening so far? Share your theories in the comments. The old house seemed to hold its breath as Richard Speck systematically bound the 8 women with strips torn from their own bed sheets. The soft cotton that had once provided comfort now became instruments of terror, cutting into their wrists as he pulled the knots tight. In the largest bedroom, he had forced them to sit in a circle on the floor, their backs against the walls. The room that had once echoed with laughter and late-night conversations now filled with whispered prayers and muffled sobs. "Please," Gloria pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're nurses. We help people. We would never hurt anyone." Speck's cold eyes fixed on her. "Shut up." The digital clock on the dresser read 12:47 a.m. Time seemed to move differently now, each minute stretching into an eternity of fear. The women tried to find comfort in looking at each other, drawing strength from familiar faces. But the terror in their eyes only reflected their own. Corazon pressed herself against the wall near the window, partially hidden behind Merlita. From this position, she could see both the door and her roommates. Something deep in her mind, some survival instinct inherited from generations of ancestors who had faced unthinkable dangers, whispered a single word: "Hide." "You," Speck pointed at Patricia. "Stand up." Pat's face went white. "Why? What are you going to do?" "Just do what I tell you." As Pat struggled to stand with her hands bound, the other women watched in growing horror. This wasn't about money anymore. Whatever Speck really wanted, it wasn't something they could give him willingly. "Please don't take her," Suzanne begged. "She has a family. Her parents are expecting her home next week." Speck grabbed Pat's arm roughly. "I said shut up." He forced her toward the door, and as they disappeared into the hallway, the remaining 7 women heard Pat's voice crack as she whispered, "Please, I'll do anything you want. Just don't hurt my friends." Corazon's heart pounded so violently she was certain everyone could hear it. In the terrible silence that followed, she began to inch backward toward the narrow space between the bed and the wall. The movement was almost imperceptible, just a few inches at a time. Minutes passed like hours. Then came sounds from elsewhere in the house that made their blood freeze. A scream, suddenly cut short. Heavy footsteps. A door slamming. Then silence more terrifying than any sound. "Oh, God," Nina whispered. "Oh, God, what is he doing to her?" When Speck returned 20 minutes later, he was alone. Pat was not with him. His shirt was disheveled, his breathing heavy. On his hands were stains that caught the bedroom light with a dark, wet shine. "You!" He pointed at Pamela. "No," Pam whispered, pulling her knees to her chest. "Please, no. Get up." As Pam was forced from the room, Corazon managed to slide another few inches backward. The space beneath the bed was narrow, but she was small. If she could just... Gloria began to recite the Lord's Prayer in a whisper. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The others joined her, their voices creating a fragile harmony in the face of unspeakable evil. But their prayers were interrupted by another scream from downstairs, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then footsteps returning. One by one, Speck came for them. Marianne, so young and full of dreams, whispered, "Tell my mother I love her," as he dragged her away. Suzanne, the quiet artist, pressed her sketch of her friends into Gloria's bound hands before she was forced to leave. As the numbers dwindled, Corazon realized with crystalline clarity that this was not a robbery gone wrong. This was systematic. This was planned. And none of them were meant to survive. When only 3 remained, herself, Merlita, and Valentina, Corazon made her desperate move. As Speck returned from Merlita, Corazon rolled backward into the narrow space beneath the bed, pressing herself flat against the wall in the shadows. "Where's the other one?" Speck's voice was sharp, dangerous. "She went to the bathroom," Valentina lied, her voice surprisingly steady. "Down the hall." From her hiding place, Corazon could see Speck's boots as he paced the room, searching. Her lungs burned as she held her breath, certain that any sound would give her away. "Find her," he ordered Merlita, but as they left the room, Corazon remained frozen in place. Through the floorboards, she could hear movement throughout the house. Footsteps, voices, more sound that she tried desperately not to understand. The house had 8 residents that night. In his rage and the darkness, Speck had lost count. He thought he had accounted for everyone. He had no idea that one small Filipino woman lay trembling beneath the bed, the only witness to what would become one of the most shocking crimes in American history. As the night wore on, the sounds gradually ceased. The house fell into a silence more complete and terrifying than any noise could ever be. Corazon remained motionless, every muscle locked in terror, as dawn slowly approached the windows of 2319, East 100th Street. Thank you for staying with us. The most shocking part is still coming. The first gray light of dawn crept through the bedroom window at 5:30 a.m., casting long shadows across the floor where Corazon Amureo remained hidden. She had not moved for over 5 hours, her body cramped and aching, her mind suspended between consciousness and shock. The house was completely silent now, not the comfortable quiet of sleeping students, but the absolute stillness of death. No footsteps, no voices, no sounds of breathing or movement anywhere in the building that had once pulsed with young life. Corazon's lips moved in silent prayer, the same words she had whispered throughout the endless night. But now, as morning light grew stronger, a terrible realization settled over her. She could not hide forever. She had to know what had happened to her friends. Slowly, painfully, she began to ease herself out from beneath the bed. Her muscles screamed in protest after hours of remaining motionless. The wooden floor felt cold against her bare feet as she crouched in the corner of the room, listening intently for any sound that might indicate Speck was still in the house. Nothing, only silence. She crept toward the bedroom door, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might give her away. The hallway beyond was empty, bathed in the strange gray light of early morning. Family photographs still smiled down from the walls, their happy faces a grotesque contrast to the nightmare that had unfolded below them. At the top of the stairs, Corazon paused. She could see down into the living room from this angle, but something was wrong with the picture. Furniture was overturned. Books and papers were scattered across the floor. And there, near the couch where they had all sat just hours before, her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. A human form, motionless, in a position that no living person would ever assume. The white fabric of a nurse's uniform, now stained with something dark and terrible. "Pamela," she whispered, and the name seemed to echo in the absolute quiet. Step by agonizing step, Corazon descended the stairs. Each creak of the old wood sounded like thunder in the silence. As she reached the bottom, the full scope of the horror revealed itself. Pamela Wilkening lay near the living room entrance, her young face peaceful in death, but her body telling a story of unimaginable violence. Ligature marks circled her throat like a grotesque necklace. Her hands, which had comforted so many patients, were still bound with strips of bedsheet. In the kitchen, Corazon found Mary and Jordan. The youngest of their group sat slumped against the cabinet, her long brown hair covering her face like a curtain. The blood had dried to the color of rust on her white uniform. Each discovery was worse than the last. In the back bedroom, she found Nina Schmale, the artist who had sketched all their faces with such loving detail. Nina's sketchbook lay open beside her, the drawings now spattered with drops of her own blood. Suzanne Ferris was in the bathroom, her careful handwriting still visible on a letter home that would never be sent. The letter spoke of excitement about graduation, about the future she would never see. But it was in the second-floor bedroom that Corazon found the scene that would haunt her nightmares forever. Patricia Matusek and Gloria Davy lay together, their bodies positioned with a cruel mockery of the friendship they had shared in life. The violence inflicted on them spoke of a rage beyond comprehension, and in the room she had shared with them for months, Corazon found Merlita, Gargullo, and Valentina Passion, her fellow Filipino nurses, women who had traveled 8,000 miles to pursue their dreams, lay side by side as if they had tried to comfort each other even in their final moments. 8 young women, 8 brilliant futures, 8 families who would never again see their daughter's smiles, all destroyed by one man's incomprehensible evil. Corazon stood in the center of what had once been her safe haven, surrounded by the bodies of her friends, and realized she was completely alone. The silence pressed against her eardrums like water. The familiar house now felt like a tomb. She had to get help. She had to tell someone. But her legs wouldn't move. Her voice wouldn't work. The magnitude of what had happened, the senseless brutality of it all, had broken something fundamental inside her. It was 6 a.m. when she finally forced herself to the front window of the second floor. The neighborhood was beginning to wake up. She could see a man walking his dog across the street, completely unaware that behind the windows of 2319 East 100th Street lay a scene that would shock the world. Corazon opened the window and drew in her first breath of outside air since the nightmare began. It tasted of freedom, of life, of possibilities that her friends would never experience again. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking from hours of silent terror. "Help me! They're all dead! Oh, God, they're all dead!" The man with the dog looked up, confused. Windows began opening in neighboring houses. People emerged onto their front porches, shielding their eyes against the morning sun as they tried to locate the source of the screaming. "Please call the police." Corazon cried, her voice echoing off the quiet houses. "Please. He killed them all. He killed all my friends. If you're still here, get ready. The final truth will change everything you thought you knew." At 6:05 a.m. on July 14th, 1966, the first police car screamed down East 100th Street, its siren shattering morning quiet of the South Side neighborhood. Officer Daniel Kelly was first through the door 2319, and what he found inside would haunt him for the rest of his career. Within an hour, the modest brick house had become the center of the largest manhunt in Chicago's history. Police cars lined the street. Detectives moved through rooms with grim faces, documenting a crime scene that defied comprehension. News vans arrived, their crews broadcasting the first reports of what would become known simply as the massacre. Corazon Amureo sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her dark eyes staring at nothing. Detective Jack Wallenda, a 20-year veteran who had seen every kind of human cruelty, knelt beside her with unusual gentleness. "Miss Amureo," he said softly, "I know this is incredibly difficult, but can you tell me what the man looked like?" Corazon's voice was barely audible. "Tall, very tall, dark hair. He had a tattoo on his arm." "What kind of tattoo?" "Words. In English. Born to raise hell." Detective Wallenda exchanged glances with his partner. A distinctive tattoo would make identification much easier if they could find the killer before he disappeared into the vast, anonymous sprawl of Chicago. Did he say anything about where he might go? Did he mention any names? Corazon shook her head. He just kept saying he needed money. But it wasn't about money. It was never about money. As police spread out across the city, Richard Speck was already struggling with the weight of his crimes. The rage that had driven him through the night was gone, replaced by a different kind of desperation. He checked into a cheap hotel under a false name, his hands still trembling from what he had done. But Speck had made a critical error. In a city of 3 million people, he had committed a crime so distinctive, so heinous, that would mobilize every law enforcement agency in the state. The tattoo that proclaimed his violent nature had become a beacon that would lead police directly to him. By evening, sketches of the suspect were on every television screen in Chicago. The distinctive tattoo was front-page news in every paper. Tips began pouring in from across the city. Someone had seen a man matching the description at a bar in Calumet City. Another witness remembered him from a diner near the waterfront. For 3 days, Speck eluded capture, moving through Chicago's underworld like a ghost. But the net was closing. On July 16th, after a failed suicide attempt at a Flophouse hotel, he was rushed to Cook County Hospital with severe cuts to his wrists. The emergency room nurse who cleaned his wounds noticed something that made her blood freeze. On the patient's left forearm, partially obscured by bandages and blood, were the words born to raise hell in faded blue ink. "Doctor," she whispered urgently, I think this might be him." The arrest that followed was almost anticlimactic. Richard Speck, the man who had terrorized an entire city, was taken into custody without resistance. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he seemed almost relieved that the hunt was over. The trial that began 8 months later would captivate the world. Corazon Amureo, the sole survivor, took the witness stand with extraordinary courage. Her testimony was clear, detailed, and devastating. Point by point, she reconstructed the night of horror, her voice never wavering as she identified Speck as a killer. "That is the man," she said, her finger pointing directly at the defendant. "That is the man who killed my friends." The defense tried every strategy they could conceive. They claimed mistaken identity. They suggested temporary insanity. They argued that Speck had been too intoxicated to form criminal intent. None of it mattered. The evidence was overwhelming, and Corazon's testimony was unshakable. On April 15, 1967, after deliberating for just 49 minutes, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty on all 8 counts of murder, the judge sentenced Richard Speck to death in the electric chair. But the story didn't end there. In 1972, the Supreme Court's decision in Furman v. Georgia temporarily abolished the death penalty, commuting Speck's sentence to life in prison. He would spend the next 24 years behind bars, becoming a grotesque celebrity among inmates and crime enthusiasts. The most disturbing chapter came in 1988, when smuggled videotapes surfaced showing Speck in prison, apparently enjoying privileges that mocked the memory of his victims. The tapes showed him with drugs, with makeup, engaging in behavior that suggested he felt no remorse for the 8 lives he had destroyed. When Speck died of a heart attack in prison in 1991, there were no mourners at his funeral. But every July 14th, people still leave flowers at the site of 2319 East 100th Street. The house itself was demolished decades ago, but the memory of 8 young women who died pursuing their dreams remains. Corazon Amureo returned to the Philippines shortly after the trial, carrying with her a trauma that would never fully heal. She rarely spoke publicly about that night, but when she did, her message was always the same. Remember them not for how they died, but for how they lived. Gloria, Patricia, Nina, Suzanne, Mary, and Pamela, Merlita, and Valentina. 8 names that represent the very best of human aspiration, cut short by the very worst of human evil. The case changed everything. Hospital security protocols were revolutionized. Student housing regulations were rewritten. The innocent trust that had once characterized places of healing was replaced by necessary vigilance. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Richard Speck case is what investigators discovered years later. Evidence suggests that the massacre on East 100th Street may not have been his only crime. Cold case files from across the Midwest contain unsolved murders that bear similarities to Speck's methods. Women attacked in their homes. Victims who trusted their killer enough to let him inside. Crime scenes that showed the same calculated brutality. How many other nights fell silent because of Richard Speck? How many other families never learned the truth about what happened to their daughters? In the files of police departments across America, those questions remain unanswered, their secrets buried as deeply as the man who might have held the answers. The legacy of that terrible night in Chicago serves as a reminder that evil can strike anywhere, anytime, destroying lives and dreams with randomness that defies understanding. But it also serves as a testament to human resilience, embodied by one small Filipino woman who survived the unthinkable and found the courage to ensure that justice was served. The 8 student nurses of South Chicago will never be forgotten. Their story continues to echo through the decades, a reminder of lives cut short and dreams that will never be fulfilled, but also the strength of those who survived to tell their story. And don't miss our next video. Subscribe to the channel and enter the placelet, and follow other stories so intriguing and frightening like this. Click on the screen to watch it now.